Palworld needs no introduction. It has taken the internet by storm, and I found myself right in the middle of it. Funny thing is that when I started playing the game, I hadn't even heard a single peep from the regular sources, and so I thought its early access release had gone under our collective radar. How very wrong I was. But after getting my hands on the game, I came to the conclusion that Palworld, being sold and explained to people as Pokemon with guns, to be an unsatisfactory description of what it is, and although that concept alone is enough to spark interest for many, I think it sells the game short. Sure, there are Pokemon with guns, but the game is not just some gimmick, but rather a roadmap for what Pokemon could be. A few things I should disclose right from the offing is that I love the monster catcher genre, generally speaking. Sure, Pokemon is where the interest began, but I love Pokemon clones such as Nexomon, Koromon, and Cassette Beast, all of which are fantastic Pokemon likes, I suppose I'll call them. So if you like the originals and want more Pokemon on your PC without an emulator or Switch, those are some great options. The reason I mention this is because I don't make these videos with any pretense of objectivity. These are all my own personal opinions, and though I do attempt to get into the head of the average person and explain things in a way that is helpful to you who is watching the video, that does not mean I am unbiased. All that to say, I was likely to love this game no matter what, merely because it has elements of Pokemon in it. I should also mention this video is merely my first thoughts on the game based on 5 hours of playing, which is very little, but the first 30 minutes are the most important part of any game anyways when it comes to convincing a player to continue, well, playing. This also isn't my full-time job, and over the course of a week, I only had 5 available hours to play and wanted to get this video out as soon as I could. I guess that means this video will have minimal spoilers, although I'm not sure how much there really is to spoil about this game. That was a lot of setup, so I feel it necessary to apologize for it. Now, onto my initial thoughts on Palworld, and why I think calling it Pokemon with Guns is actually selling it short. When I was first dropped into the world, there is a very short cutscene that plays with the commonly used trope of some dude washing up on a mysterious world. I don't understand why so many games like this feel it necessary to have that be the case. Pokemon just accepts the way things are, and, well, why can't anybody just do that? Perhaps the reason is because Palworld is, in my opinion, first and foremost a survival game. Having you wash ashore then is a simple way of explaining why you have literally nothing on your person. I did find the start of the game to be quite daunting. My main issue was the sheer number of UI elements.
Ooh, boy.
It took me a while to figure out where the settings were so I could mess with things like volume and graphic quality. In the end, I decided not to even explore most of the tabs and options and rather went straight into the world to start punching a chicken. These first few Mons, which is what I'll call these creatures, I'm not calling them pals, were admittedly not the most interesting. There was a chicken and a sheep, but at least the weird cat thing was more unique in its appearance. As far as tutorials go, there isn't anything you're forced to do or accomplish. You are free to do whatever you want. The only issue with you failing to perform any of the items listed in the tutorial box is that the box will not go away. Part of me wishes that there was an option somewhere to remove this box and I couldn't find one, but it's actually very important to do what it tells you. My only objective when hopping onto the new world was catching Mons. This is my only objective when playing any monster catcher: catch, train, and battle. Palworld handles combat quite differently from your typical Pokemon game because it is not turn-based combat and you yourself are involved in it. You don't even have all that much control over your Mon's actions either. There are certain abilities you might be able to use, but if you're not using one of them, then your companion will do whatever it likes. I didn't find this took away from the Pokemon magic, however. It was quite fun being able to participate in battles, and the Souls-like dodging system made each battle feel more engaging and dangerous. Despite your Mons doing whatever they like, you still need to choose them carefully. Type advantages are still going to make a major impact on your success, so if you put out a Mon with a bad type, then they might get taken out. I also found that certain Mons were simply better at combat than others, and this wasn't always clear based on appearances alone. In fact, there was one Mon called Tombat, maybe Toombat, whom I captured precisely because it looked like it'd be good in combat. However, I found he was often lacking. There are so many hidden factors that went into a Mon actually performing well while fighting. What attacks do they use and how fast are they? Mons with slower moving attacks I found would often miss their target. Some Mons were more aggressive than others and would do a better job at keeping an enemy locked onto them rather than on me. Smaller Mons had a much easier time navigating their surroundings and wouldn't get stuck behind rocks and trees as often, and end up shooting the landscape rather than their target. So although there is no turn-based combat, there is still a great deal of thought that needs to be put into each mon and when to use them. Occasionally, I'd find myself in the midst of a battle only to have my mon wiped out, and I'd be in a panic as I scramble to consider which mon I should send out in its place. And this was a great aspect of combat. One other note on the combat, although this is more on the negative side, is that I quickly found myself being more and more of a non-factor. As you progress and level up, you will be able to craft new and improved weapons, but at the point I started fighting mons whose level was in the double digits roughly, no matter the weapon I had, I could do very little damage, forcing me to rely almost solely on the mons. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I would greatly prefer playing a more active role in the battle if I'm going to be forced to participate in it, rather than being a bystander barking orders. I still did find ways to participate by occasionally drawing an enemy's attention away from my mon, which was an interesting reversal of roles where I had to become the cannon fodder for my mon to survive instead of the other way around. I actually liked doing this, and was quite fine with it when taking down enemies stronger than me, but when my weapons struggle with killing enemies several levels below me, it felt more like a nuisance. I suppose this is when I should mention my own potential mistakes when playing this game. That is to say that some of my complaints about it might be a result of me missing some important details or not discovering the solution the game has to offer. After all, I have only played for 5 hours, and I did all that before I even knew people were talking about it. So I went into this entirely blind, trying to figure out things for myself. Granted, I like doing things blind anyways, but whatever. I say this because perhaps there is some way to get better weapons at my points in progression that I have missed. Of course, there are guns in the game, although I haven't reached the points I can make them to the best of my knowledge. But for where I am, I feel quite underpowered. This then would probably be a good time to mention the tutorial and how I played most of those first 5 hours to help illustrate how I might have missed some important information and how you can avoid making the same mistake. The tutorial very early on encourages the player to level up their base and to catch 30 mons. There are other things as well, but we'll stick with these 2 individual missions. Having approached this game like it were Pokemon, I went straight to capturing mons, but never duplicates. After all, why would I need multiple of the same mon? And so I went on killing anything I had already captured, thinking I'd grind for the XP by killing them. It wasn't until near the end of my time that I discovered how big of a mistake this was. Palworld greatly incentivizes you to catch mons, not defeat them. The reason I say this is because the XP to be gained by capturing a mon can reap exponentially greater rewards than defeating one ever could. For every mon you beat, you gain a set level of experience, presumably based on the strength of the mon you take down. That can be a safe way to grind XP, and because I thought of this game like Pokemon, I treated it like the typical grind sessions you would have in those games. To level up, find the nearest location with tons of Pokemon and destroy the local ecosystem. However, in Palworld, XP grinding is far more effective when you catch every mon possible. When you catch the first of any one mon, the XP gained from what I can tell might as well be the same as if you had beaten it. However, when you catch a duplicate, you are given a little extra XP, and the same goes for the third and everyone after that. You gain more and more experience for every duplicate of a mon you catch. There might be a certain cap to this, but it's a rather large cap. Having missed this core feature of the game, I went about exploring and catching only what I thought was interesting, and the end result of this was that my mons would keep pace with my leveling, and so any mon who had a greater level than me would remain at a higher level and suffer from descaling, which I'll talk about later. This made me and my team less effective than we could have been had I grinded out experience the correct way. The other major way I missed out on Palworld's core game mechanics is where automation and base building is concerned. For the longest time, I couldn't figure out how to upgrade my house, let alone create a base. At one point, I had unlocked a bed and tried to build it, but then the game said that I wasn't able to, that I need a closed structure. I just had no idea how to make a closed structure. It wasn't until several hours later, when I felt as though I were missing something important, that I reread the description of technology you unlock as you play, and noticed that a platform I had written off as nothing more than a platform was actually a foundation from which to build my base. Once I figured out catching was superior to fighting and, well, how to build a house, the game really started to open up to me. I was finally able to level up and spend less time grinding for materials, allowing for greater expansion. These were my primary 2 issues when I was playing the game. Not that they're issues with the game, just issues with how I played it and approached it. I tried too hard to play Pokemon with guns and not Palworld. The way that both should be played is quite different. Sure, you still make battle with cute creatures and catch them in these fun spheres, but if you treat Palworld like a game where you collect a team and then train them to be the very best, then you're doing it wrong. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention boss battles, both human and mons, as well as dungeons. I only ever encountered one human boss, so I'll talk about them really quickly. As I explored, I spotted a large glowing tower that harkens to something you'd see in Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom. This is just good world design, as seeing a giant glowing tower naturally makes the player want to go check out what's over there. It gives a clear sense of direction. The first time I attempted the boss battle, I was woefully unprepared and ended up dying, but the second time, things went perfectly. And by that, I mean it was a nail-biter. I forget what level this tower is and what level I was, but I know I was underleveled for the fight, and yet I took it on anyways, cause I'm just like that. It's something that I would often do in Palworld, taking on creatures and bosses significantly more powerful than me, and more often than not, I'd be rightfully put in my place, but sometimes, like with this boss battle, things went just right. In the end, there isn't much to say about the battle itself. Some random chick walks up and summons a large yellow hairball and starts shooting electricity. My job was to use the pillars for cover while letting my mons do all the work and participating by doing damage equivalent to throwing pebbles at a brick wall. My little damage output did end up making a difference in the end, and one fun ability the Fox part Mon has is that I can use it as a flamethrower, which is a very nice way to combine the abilities of player and creature, so I can do that for extra damage by, combining myself with the Mon. So for the entirety of the battle, I needed to keep on rotating my Fox in and out because the flamethrower only lasts for so long, so once it was done, I'd have to rotate to another one and use them until the flamethrower recharged. The battle was, in all likelihood, kinda scuffed, but I narrowly edged out a victory right before time ran out while on low health, and it felt like quite the accomplishment.
Yes! We did it! We did it! Let's go!
Then there were Mon bosses. The map will actually have markers for these as you explore their section of the world. These Mons are typically larger than the average ones and have a greater health pool. Near my spawn was a mammoth, a level 30 something, which seems obsessive, but the first Mon boss I actually battled was a cute thing called Chillet. I love this thing to death and I want one in real life. The battle with Chillet and other Mon bosses has a whole different dynamic to it. With a human boss, the only objective is to win, but with a boss, my objective shifted to catching the thing. And as you'd imagine, that's quite hard to do when you're underleveled and you have less direct control over your Mons. I can't tell you the number of times I'd be about to catch a Mon and one of my companions would kill it right before I toss the sphere. The deer in particular was guilty of doing this all the time. This was actually one situation where my low damage output came in handy though, as I was able to calculate how much damage I would do and recall my Mon just in time as I pegged the boss's health down to as low as physically possible to increase the odds of catching the thing. I did nearly run into a problem though, as I was using poison arrows and the poison just about killed the thing, but the ball right before the fatal damage would have been inflicted was enough to catch Chillet. So far, that's the only Mon boss I've fought in the wild, and so I don't know if they'd respawn, but I sure hope they would. I love this thing and was even able to ride it later. Then there's dungeons. I only ever went into one of these, and only ever found two, but the first one I found was way over my level at the time. But these dungeons are, not all that much more than boss battles, just maybe a little different, based on the, one experience that I had. See, when I went into the dungeon, there was a, Mon boss, but there was also several other smaller Mons that were there to help him. This made the dungeons much more challenging just because, there's a lot more people around and more than one target to deal with. I ended up needing to find a way to get my Mon to battle the main boss while I dealt with the smaller ones, and that hardly worked as I couldn't kill them fast enough to prevent one or two of them from peeling off and overwhelming my Mon. This is when my own damage output being increased would have been greatly beneficial. Dungeons also reset after a set amount of real-life time, which is kinda cool, so you can always return to catch the thing again, or maybe it's a different Mon each time, I don't know, I assume it's the same thing. But you can redo dungeons, so that's neat. Now, I've been mostly positive to this game, but I do want to list a few grievances or issues I ran into while playing. Two that I'd list as complaints are the descaling of Mons and the inability to easily move workstations. Real quick with workstations, when I learned how to make an actual base, I had already made several workbenches out in the open and wanted to move my base a short distance down the path. I didn't want to leave the benches where they were, and I was hoping I could simply move them to my base or else destroy them for a refund of materials, even if it's a diminished return. But the workbenches were far too durable, and it may have taken some 30 minutes just to break one of them. I wish they could have been made much weaker and thus easier to destroy, and if they're this tanky as to guard them from griefing in multiplayer or to keep them safe during raids — yes, there are raids in this game, but I won't be getting to that — then I understand a little bit. I just wish I could have moved them. They're cheap enough to make more, but I wanted to remove the eyesores from my base. It's not a big deal, I just wish there was some functionality for this, and maybe I missed it, but I'd never found any. When it comes to descaling, I mean that mons are forced to be never greater than your own level. So if you catch a level 20 monster while you're at level 10, then the mon will be forced to level 10. They still retain their levels, so if you grind it up to level 20, then it'd keep pace with you, but I struggle to understand the points of this. Why punish the player for taking a risk and fighting mons several levels above them? Perhaps you could become overpowered quite quickly if they didn't, but that's mostly because of a different issue with the game, which I guess I'll combine with this one. The pathfinding of the mons can often be rather poor. Not 20 minutes into the game, and I tried fighting a level 14 bird while I was maybe, level 2. I actually ended up coming quite close to beating the thing though, because for the longest time, the bird got stuck behind a rock and couldn't figure out how to fly around it, allowing me to peck away at its health. Just not quite enough before it did figure out how to get around the small rock. There were times when a minor incline could serve as a shield, or times when my companions would attack trees and walls rather than their opponents. So perhaps descaling was a solution to this pathfinding issue, so that way you can't that easily cheese the really strong ones. But if not, it is so very hard to catch a mon whose level is greater than your own that I see little reason to not allow people to catch them and use them at full strength. One other note about pathfinding was also with the base I ended up building. One benefit of catching duplicates of mons and setting them up at a base is that they can do some of the grinding and crafting for you. However, after I made a house, I found that the mons would never go inside. At best, they'd walk up to the door and drop things off, but whenever I started a recipe or a structure inside the house, the mons would ignore it entirely. Maybe this is intentional, that the mons don't walk inside, but I have my doubts, and it was a point of frustration as I had ordered several copies of an item that took a long time to craft and did so figuring I could let the mons do it as I tended to other things, but they never did, leaving me to do it myself. One last thing that I wouldn't say is necessarily an issue, but something I found odd, and that would be death. Death in Palworld results in all your gear and inventory being dropped at the site of your death. You spawn back in with nothing to your name except your mons. This does create a consequence for death, sure, but in the end, all I needed to do was run back to where I was and retrieve my gear and go about my day. It never served as anything more than a time waster. It feels a little non-committal. Heck, Stardew Valley has a greater consequence for dying than Palworld if you ask me. The main reason it's a time waster is because the mons in the wild almost never attack you out of the blue, so there aren't any real threats to you retrieving the gear. Perhaps more hostile mons will come in the future, and this whole death system will make more sense later in the game, and so remember to take everything I'm saying in this video with a grain of salt, but because there was no threats, it was only a matter of traveling to the location, which itself was never difficult since none of the gear increased my mobility. That was the mons that did that. So I wonder if it makes sense to cause the player to lose a few items, but spawn back in with everything else in hand. By that I mean, say you had 20 rocks, then after you die you lose 5, and spawn back in with 15, never to see those 5 rocks ever again. I don't know, just a thought. All that said, I played Palworld for 5 hours, and I am loving it. I really do hope this game continues to be popular, and as it's been a riot to play and so many of the concepts feel like Pokemon finally reaching the potential we all know it has. So maybe Game Freak will take some notes from it and make a truly open world Pokemon game? I doubt it, but who knows. I'd also love to keep making videos on the game and dive deeper into it, what with all it has to offer. So if you enjoyed this video and want to see more of the game from me, then do be sure to like and comment on it so it can reach a wider audience. As I mentioned, I only had 5 hours available over a week, and part of this is because there are other games I'm playing so I can make videos on them for this channel. The only way I can justify playing this game more is if you like it and enjoy it. And if people like a series on Palworld, then I hope to do deep dives into other games like Elden Ring and Red Dead Redemption. We're still working on what all to do with this channel, so let me know what you want. Let me know what you like to see, what you want me to do. We'll play with it. But with that said, thanks for watching. Hopefully you'll give me an excuse to keep playing this awesome game, and hopefully if the rest of the internet has not already convinced you, then I have revealed to you why you should play Palworld.